Welcome to the deep dive. You've sent us a really compelling stack of reports and papers, all focused on one incredibly dynamic region, ASEAN. This deep dive is essentially your personal guide to navigating the future of work, specifically in Southeast Asia. Our mission is to cut through the noise, pull out the most important nuggets of knowledge, and give you a clearer picture of the seismic shifts happening there.
What's fascinating here is how technology, economics, and, well, social forces are colliding to reshape everything about work in this part of the world. We're going to unpack the rise of AI, the changing nature of jobs, the gig economy, and the absolutely critical role of education and policy in, keeping pace.
It's a region that's booming, but also right on the front lines of the fourth industrial revolution. There are unique challenges alongside immense opportunities. Let's dive in and see what these sources really tell us is happening on the ground. First off, let's set the scene. What exactly is ASEAN, and why should we care about its future of work right now?
Well, the material you provided lays out that ASEAN is the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, formed back in '67. The big goals were regional peace, stability, and economic cooperation. It's 10 member states: Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, Philippines, Thailand, Brunei, Vietnam, Laos, Myanmar, Cambodia.
Right, the whole group.
And it's a powerhouse. It's the third largest market in Asia, sixth globally. We're talking over 646 million people, with a labor force hitting 381 million.
That's a massive workforce. And the sources make a point that the changes we're seeing are expected to be particularly profound in mid-income countries, many of which are in ASEAN. They might be at an earlier stage of technological development compared to some other places, which makes the speed of this change even more impactful, right?
Right. They're riding this wave of economic growth, but simultaneously grappling directly with the challenges of what's called the Fourth Industrial Revolution, or 4IR. Understanding their situation is key because the region is increasingly interdependent, and policy gaps there can have ripple effects, especially as they look towards their ASEAN Community Vision 2025.
And the history matters too, doesn't it? The sources touch on labor migration.
Yeah, exactly. Going back to agreements like the Bali-Concord-2 or the ASCC blueprint, they started seeing migration less as just a governance problem and more as a development opportunity. Pushing for things like social protection and lifelong learning for migrant workers, it shows us awareness of a dynamic workforce isn't entirely new.
Okay, let's talk about the elephant in the room, the big driver of all this. Technology. The reports couldn't be clearer. This is fundamentally changing the workplace.
Absolutely. Rapid technological growth is paving the way for a heavily digital future. I mean, things like the metaverse are recent buzzwords, but the core idea is how governments and industries are leveraging technology to completely reshape where work happens and how it's done.
And COVID just threw fuel on that fire.
Massively accelerated it, yeah. Pushing things online faster than anyone expected, shopping, seminars, you name it.
So it's not just about optimizing existing tasks, but fundamentally changing what work is and even why we do it in certain ways.
Precisely. And a huge part of this is the impact of AI and automation. We've seen impressive AI advances. And what's different this time? It's not just routine manual or data entry tasks being automated. The sources point out it's increasingly affecting non-routine cognitive tasks.
Like what, specifically?
Think medical diagnoses, spotting financial fraud, drafting reports, or even, screening job applications.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, because this kind of flips the script a bit. Previous tech waves often displaced low-skilled routine jobs. This wave raises concerns about displacement for medium to high-skilled white-collar workers.
It does, but the sources also offer important nuance. Automation by AI doesn't automatically equal displacement.
How so?
Well, increased efficiency and lower production costs could actually lead to higher output if there's enough demand. The critical pivot point then becomes whether workers can learn to collaborate with the new technology and adapt to the tasks AI simply can't perform.
That makes sense. It's about augmenting human work and shifting what humans focus on rather than necessarily replacing humans entirely. The sources also paint a picture of a much broader digital transformation happening across every industry.
Right. It's fundamentally changing how information is used, shared, and even thought about. We've seen this with microblogging platforms changing how news spreads. They mention examples like the Arab Spring or the Virginia Tech shooting, or, digital video challenging traditional broadcasting, real-time data powering maps and sentiment analysis. It's everywhere.
And data itself is seen differently now.
Totally. Highlighted as a completely new type of industrial asset, almost like a raw material big data. Now easy to acquire, store, and spread. But there's a warning in the sources that firms can be sleepily ignorant of data's importance, which can really hold them back.
Okay, so with technology reshaping the playing field, how is the actual workforce changing on the ground in ASEAN? The sources map out some clear trends.
A significant one is the long-term decline in agricultural workers as people move towards service sector employment across the region. The material gives some concrete examples. Back in 2017, Cambodia and Vietnam still had relatively high agricultural employment, like 41%, 30%.
Right.
But countries like Malaysia and Thailand had already seen huge drops. Singapore, perhaps unsurprisingly, leads the pack with services making up about 70% of employment.
And within services, there's a shift too, isn't there? Less face-to-face stuff?
Correct. The proportion of services requiring direct physical interaction is shrinking, with more services being delivered remotely. This varies hugely by country, though. While sources note places like Korea had over 50% remote service minutes by 2020, most ASEAN countries were below 20% remote intensity at that time.
Speaking of remote work, COVID obviously had a big impact globally, but the sources suggest it played out a bit differently in ASEAN compared to places like Europe or the US.
Yeah, they highlight that in ASEAN it was less about everyone shifting to remote and more of a simultaneous WFH and no WFH experience. Employers rapidly adopted flexibility out of necessity fear of the virus, shifting employee expectations, embracing both WFH and hybrid models quite widely.
There was that survey of, 432 ASEAN employers mentioned. What did that reveal about their experience?
It showed 61% were implementing WFH or hybrid arrangements extensively. The top issues they reported facing were, well, classic remote work problems, productivity concerns, monitoring performance, communication breakdowns.
But what's interesting is they also claimed quite broad positive impacts from this shift.
They did. Lower commute times and reduced carbon emissions are fairly obvious benefits, sure. But many employers also listed higher productivity and performance as top benefits.
Ah, really?
Yeah, though the sources do note that cultural factors, like the strong preference for face-to-face interaction common in the region and the significant economic variations between countries, meant the actual remote work trends and outcomes were quite mixed. It wasn't uniform.
Right, makes sense. Another major palpable shift is the undeniable growth of the gig economy.
Definitely. Platforms like Uber and DoorDash are just the most visible examples of a potentially transformative change in how people earn income. The sources point out that development in this area is really shifting towards Southeast Asia, with companies specifically designing apps for the regional market.
Ah, okay, so it's becoming a distinct employment niche.
Exactly. While its global size is hard to pin down because many platforms are private, it's clearly expanding rapidly. We're seeing significant numbers freelancing online, and app-based platforms are becoming routine for buying and selling goods and services in many countries.
So all these technological and workforce shifts bring us to the crucial question of skills. The sources really hammer home the link between skills, education, and whether ASEAN is ready for this future.
They absolutely do. As AI adoption grows, ASEAN economies are facing the reality of significant gaps in human capital development. The focus has rapidly shifted to future skills, particularly soft skills like critical thinking and collaboration, alongside, obviously, the necessary tech skills.
And there's a gap there.
Well, the material suggests that countries in the ASEAN 5 group have been seen as potential future talent pools for software companies, but they're struggling to keep pace with the speed of change. This allows lower-cost alternatives to gain ground. Even in countries with relatively good English proficiency, local graduates are worrying about their job prospects if they lack the cutting-edge technical skills.
So it sounds like it's more than just adding a few tech courses to a curriculum. There needs to be a much deeper mindset shift.
Exactly. The sources argue that transitioning early and embracing change is absolutely key. Legacy skills still matter, of course, but there needs to be a clear, accessible path to mastering the technologies of today and tomorrow. They offer a really interesting idea. Perhaps the most valuable skill of all is simple curiosity.
Curiosity.
Yeah, they phrase it wondrously. Choke Google with questions. It's about understanding why technology is used and what problems it solves, not just how to use a specific tool. Being honest about what you don't know, coupled with, a burning willingness to learn, is highlighted as incredibly valuable.
What about the role of educational institutions themselves in this transition, universities and colleges?
Well, there are millions of university students across ASEAN, which is a huge asset. But the sources point out that the systems, quality, and culture vary enormously, country by country.
Right.
And while the internet offers access to knowledge, Access isn't equal for everyone. Governments have a crucial role to play in ensuring fairness and equity in the education system to create better opportunities for all citizens.
So funding is an issue too.
Definitely. The importance of educational background is stressed, but many developing countries simply lack the funds needed for quality schools. The sources suggest community-based initiatives partnering with universities could be a way forward. But this requires a deep understanding of local culture to be effective.
And studying abroad isn't necessarily the golden ticket anymore. You can't just send everyone overseas.
That's right. The material indicates that studying in a developed country doesn't guarantee success when you return home. ASEAN universities really need to build up their own systems to become high-quality education centers themselves. There's also a practical hurdle mentioned. The lack of agreement on course credits between institutions hinders student mobility within the region, which could otherwise facilitate skill transfer.
But ASEAN itself is looking at this, right? Some initiatives.
Yes, the sources do mention some strategic initiatives ASEAN is considering, things like potentially dedicating $1 billion to educational finance, developing an educational curriculum box, which sounds like a standardized framework or set of resources,
Interesting.
incentivizing lifelong reskilling programs, and improving how skilled foreign workers are managed. These show an awareness at the regional level of the scale of the challenge.
Okay, beyond education, what about the broader policy landscape and the challenges governments face? What do the sources highlight here?
A core challenge is creating enough quality jobs to tackle poverty and inequality, which are major concerns in the region. There's a growing policy focus on job creation and human resource development. This means policies are needed to manage labor supply, improve human resources, handle migration flows effectively, and crucially, protect migrant workers.
And this is all happening while tech is ramping up.
Exactly, all against the backdrop of increasing tech adoption and the potential for what the sources call silent instability if labor conditions deteriorate.
The ASEAN Economic Community, AEC, aimed for free flow of skilled labor, but the sources suggest there's been resistance there, still.
They do. Despite efforts towards deeper integration, like the ASEAN Framework Agreement on Trade and Services, AFES, the commitments made are described as somewhat shallow. Negotiations to open up services further and truly facilitate skilled migration have faced ongoing disputes and resistance from member states. Promoting skill mobility is a recognized goal, but it remains a significant challenge in practice.
Got it. Another major barrier discussed is the digital divide.
Yes. While the sources draw on context outside ASEAN, they frame it as highly relevant. They describe the digital divide as much more than just lacking computer literacy or hardware. It's fundamentally a gap in access to the socioeconomic benefits of ICT information and communication technology.
And this divide isn't just between countries, it's inside them too, like rich and poor, urban and rural.
Exactly. It exists between countries, certainly, but also between regions within countries, between different types of companies, and very significantly between people based on factors like sex, age, education level, and experience. Within countries, it's often economic, tied to purchasing power, but social divides are just as significant.
And policies often miss the mark.
Sometimes. They often focus too narrowly on just providing literacy training or hardware, missing the real issue, which is enabling people to genuinely benefit from using the technology in meaningful ways.
Change itself, behaviorally, is also presented as a significant barrier, people just resisting change.
Right. The sources dedicate a section to the psychological side of this transformation. Change, even if necessary, can cause shock, insecurity, and fear. It can lead to real emotional upheaval that can seriously obstruct implementation. Effective change management, therefore, requires a deep analysis of these behavioral issues, not just relying on ad hoc solutions.
So resistance can be quite strong.
Particularly strong when people perceive a threat to their position or even their existence, which can lead to tactics ranging from subtle linguistic manipulation to active sabotage.
Wow. Okay, beyond policies and barriers, there are also critical cultural considerations that shape how work is experienced and will evolve in ASEAN.
Absolutely. The region is incredibly diverse demographically, which means there are many different perceptions and expectations around work. Understanding this diversity isn't just a compliance issue. The sources suggest it creates real opportunities for organizations in terms of diversity, inclusion, attracting talent, and boosting productivity.
And diversity means more than just nationality.
Way beyond nationality, it includes gender, disability, generational differences, and much more. The rise of the millennial workforce is particularly notable. They're expected to make up 75% by 2025.
75%.
Yeah, and There's a strong finding mentioned that companies with greater gender diversity, especially with women in leadership roles, tend to see better financial performance. So, embedding diversity deep within HR strategies is seen as critical for success in the future.
The sources also highlight the contrast between cultural attitudes, specifically individualism versus collectivism, and how this impacts the workplace. Can you unpack that a bit?
Sure. You have cultures like Australia or the US, where individualism is very strong, emphasizing personal independence and accountability. In contrast, many cultures in ASEAN are more collectivistic, placing a higher value on group harmony, loyalty, and shared accountability. This difference significantly shapes day-to-day workplace operations and management styles.
How does that play out?
Well, they use Malaysia as an example, describing it as more communion-directed. This means there's a strong concern for how goals are achieved within the group context, with high value placed on warmth, steadiness, and achieving agreement.
So consensus is key.
Very key. In such cultures, senior management might focus more on building strong teams and consensus, whereas in more individualistic cultures, decisive individual action might be prioritized. Things like obedience, acquiescence, and loyalty are often highly valued in more hierarchical structures, and direct questioning of authority might be avoided out of politeness. That's important context for things like training or implementing change.
Definitely. Okay, let's bring some of these themes to life with a few examples from specific countries in ASEAN. Pulling from the case studies and the sources, how about Cambodia?
Cambodia, for instance, is presented as still facing significant challenges in digital transformation, lagging on many key ICT indicators: low internet penetration, low digital competency. The sources emphasize that for Cambodia, the need for broader, high-quality basic education, capacity building, and widespread reskilling is paramount.
Alongside tech access itself.
Alongside initiatives like digitizing schools and making internet use more affordable by reducing taxes, it highlights how the digital divide impacts a country's ability to even begin the transformation journey.
Singapore is often held up as a leader in the region. What do the sources say there?
Indeed. Singapore's Smart Nation initiative is discussed as a prime example of a government proactively trying to integrate technology across society. They're working to strengthen its position as a business hub through R&D grants, public-private partnerships, and creating a smart regulatory environment.
But it's not all smooth sailing.
No. Even there, the sources acknowledge significant challenges remain: the risks of automation displacing workers, inequality in access to advanced skills development, and the danger of getting stuck in low-value activities if they don't continually innovate. It underscores that even leaders need a coherent, ongoing skill strategy.
What about Indonesia's massive digital economy? That seems to be booming.
It is. The sources detail the explosive growth, particularly in e-commerce. This is fueled by a really sophisticated internet ecosystem and incredibly high internet usage among the population. They give examples like GoFood, significantly boosting small culinary businesses, and discuss the potential for new areas like online advertising models.
And why is it working so well there?
It's seen as feasible, partly due to demographics, a young population eager for education and digitally savvy, and also because there's a pool of well-educated people who might otherwise struggle to find high-income traditional jobs, making the gig economy or digital work appealing.
Interesting dynamic. And Vietnam.
Vietnam's journey is highlighted, transitioning rapidly from a predominantly agriculture-based economy. It has a young, relatively literate workforce, making it a promising market for foreign investment. The sources discuss Vietnam's ambitious workforce development plan for 2021-2025, which sets out specific goals to raise education standards, boost productivity, and drive growth.
Specific targets.
Yeah, clear targets for the number of trained certified workers and improving vocational training facilities. Though the pandemic, despite previous gains, did underscore vulnerabilities in their workforce.
Okay. So, as organizations and countries in ASEAN navigate all this change, what are the key future trends the sources suggest we keep an eye on?
Well, beyond simply recovering from crises like the pandemic, organizations are facing what are described as existential challenges. They are fundamentally redefining the nature of work itself, asking what work needs doing, who's best placed to do it, and how it should be accomplished. This involves rethinking operating models and the very purpose of corporate functions.
And the role of the physical office is clearly part of that rethinking.
Huge part. It's no longer assumed to be the center of the work universe. Organizations are experimenting extensively with hybrid models, viewing the office as a destination, not a default, primarily for collaboration and connection.
Which creates new challenges for leaders.
Absolutely. Complex dilemmas regarding maintaining productivity, shaping culture, and ensuring fairness between remote and in-office workers.
The concept of sustainability in work is also coming to the forefront, I saw mentioned. What does that mean?
Yeah, the sources discuss the emergence of sustainable work practices. Put simply, this means ensuring equal opportunity within the work system for both current employees and future generations. It encompasses foundational things like the need for work itself, fair pay, safety, a good working environment, and shared opportunities.
So beyond just environmental sustainability.
Much broader.
Yeah.
A framework with 7 dimensions is mentioned, covering areas like the inherent justification of the work being done, pay structures, working hours, and Social Security. This concept is contrasted with potential negative outcomes driven purely by unchecked market forces or, greed.
And how does the physical design of the workplace fit into this future, the actual look and feel?
The sources make the point that companies are increasingly recognizing the direct link between an engaging workplace design and employee productivity and satisfaction. Rethinking office spaces is becoming essential for attracting and retaining talent. Innovative ideas are being explored, described with terms like dark mood, edgy, and modern designs,
Interesting names.
focusing not just on aesthetics but creating specific zones for collaboration, private booths for focused work, and designs that adapt to more nomadic work styles as traditional assigned desks become less central.
Right. So to wrap this up, the sources conclude by really stressing the complex socioeconomic context across ASEAN, which was significantly worsened by the pandemic. It led to economic slowdowns, rising unemployment, and unfortunately widening disparities across the region.
Yeah, and they suggest that because the conditions and starting points vary so much from country to country within ASEAN, we're likely to see a kind of stratification in how the future of work unfolds. Different countries will likely experience and adapt to these profound changes quite differently.
Which highlights a really pressing need not just for more research to understand the nuances, but crucially, for immediate, targeted action.
Exactly. Action to address these varying conditions and try to ensure a more equitable transition for everyone.
We've covered a lot of ground today, from the fundamental economic forces and technological shifts shaping the region to the absolutely vital roles of education, smart policy, and understanding local cultures. All of this seen through the lens of ASEAN, based on the material you shared. It's clear the path forward here isn't simple or uniform. It's a complex interplay of global trends and the incredibly diverse realities on the ground.
Which leaves us with something important for you to consider. As technology and global forces continue to redefine work everywhere, how might understanding the diverse experiences, challenges, and proactive strategies within a region as complex and dynamic as ASEAN better prepare you to adapt, collaborate, or even find opportunities in our increasingly interconnected world?
That's a powerful thought to leave with. Thank you for bringing these insightful sources to our attention for this deep dive. We hope this has given you a valuable shortcut to being well informed on this fascinating topic.